Karen's foot slammed on the brakes, and the school van screeched to a halt. The driver, frantically trying to avoid a collision, stared at her with wide eyes. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted, gripping the steering wheel. Karen narrowed her eyes, unfazed by his outrage. "My son is running late, and you need to wait for him," she declared, her voice dripping with entitlement. The other parents in the van looked on in stunned silence, unsure of how to react to Karen's brazen behavior. She had made it clear from the start that the rules didn't apply to her or her precious son, Tyler. As the seconds ticked by, the driver tried to reason with her. "Ma'am, I have a schedule to keep. I can't just hold up the entire van for one student." Karen scoffed, her hand firmly planted on the door handle. "Well, that's not my problem. Tyler needs to get to school, and you're going to wait for him." She crossed her arms defiantly, daring the driver to challenge her. The other parents exchanged anxious glances, realizing that this confrontation was not going to end well. They had all encountered Karen's entitled attitude before, but this latest stunt was a new low, even for her. Just then, a disheveled Tyler came running towards the van, his backpack bouncing haphazardly on his shoulders. "Mom, I'm here. I'm sorry I'm late," he panted, hurrying to the door. Karen turned to the driver, a triumphant grin on her face. "See, now you can go, and make sure you drive safely." She ushered Tyler inside, completely oblivious to the seething frustration of the other parents and the driver. As the van pulled away, the driver shook his head in disbelief. Unbelievable. That woman has no respect for anyone else. He glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of Karen waving smugly at the departing vehicle. Little did she know that her entitled behavior had just set in motion a series of events that would turn her world upside down. The principal, having received multiple complaints about Karen's antics, had already decided to take action. This was the last straw, and the consequences were about to come crashing down. Principal Wilkins had seen it all in his decades-long career, but Karen's latest stunt had pushed him to the brink. The frantic calls from the school van driver and concerned parents left him no choice but to take immediate action. As the school bell rang, signaling the start of the day, Principal Wilkins strode into Karen's son Tyler's classroom. The students fell silent, sensing the gravity of the situation. "Tyler, I need you to come with me to my office," the principal said sternly. "Your mother has some explaining to do." Tyler's face paled, and he quickly gathered his belongings, following the principal down the eerily quiet hallway. The other students whispered among themselves, speculating about what could have possibly happened. In the principal's office, Karen sat fidgeting uncomfortably, her perfectly manicured nails tapping on the armrest of the chair. She had received a summons from the school, and the thought of facing the principal filled her with a mix of irritation and unease. "Mrs. Bartlett, I have received multiple complaints about your behavior this morning," Principal Wilkins began, his tone authoritative yet measured. "Blocking the school van and holding up the entire bus just because your son was running late is unacceptable." Karen opened her mouth to interject, but the principal raised his hand, silencing her. "I understand that getting your child to school on time can be a challenge, but your actions today were reckless and disruptive. Not only did you put the safety of the other students at risk, but you also showed a complete disregard for the school's policies and procedures." Tyler fidgeted uncomfortably in the chair, his eyes fixed on the floor, as the principal continued. "This is not the first time we've had issues with your behavior, Mrs. Bartlett. I've been more than patient, but I'm afraid I can no longer tolerate this kind of entitled, disruptive conduct. You have two choices. Either you agree to attend a parenting class to learn better conflict resolution skills, or we will have no choice but to suspend Tyler from the school." Karen's eyes widened in shock, and she opened her mouth to protest, but the principal silenced her with a raised hand. "This is not up for discussion. The decision is yours, Mrs. Bartlett. I suggest you choose wisely for your son's sake." The air in the room grew heavy with tension as Karen contemplated her options. She had never faced such a stern ultimatum before, and the thought of having to attend a parenting class was mortifying. But the prospect of Tyler being suspended was even worse. As Karen sat in silence, her mind raced, trying to find a way out of this predicament. Little did she know that this was only the beginning of her downfall. The tension in the principal's office was palpable as Karen stared at him, her mind racing. The thought of having to attend a parenting class was utterly humiliating, but the alternative of Tyler being suspended from school was even worse. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Karen spoke up, her voice laced with resignation. "Fine, I'll do the parenting class," she said through gritted teeth. "But I want it to be the shortest one possible, and I don't want anyone at the school to know about it." Principal Wilkins nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's fair," he replied. "The class is 2 evenings a week for the next 4 weeks. I expect you to attend every session, and if you miss even one, Tyler will be suspended immediately." Karen's jaw tightened, but she knew she had no other choice. "All right, I'll do it," she conceded, her pride wounded. The principal turned to Tyler, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. "Tyler, I hope your mother's actions today have taught you a valuable lesson about responsibility and respect. I expect you to be on time from now on, and if you're ever late again, there will be consequences." Tyler nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Yes, sir. It won't happen again." As they left the principal's office, Karen shot Tyler a venomous glare. "This is all your fault, you know," she hissed under her breath. "If you had just woken up on time, none of this would have happened." Tyler flinched, feeling the weight of his mother's anger. He knew better than to argue, lest he incur her wrath even further. The rest of the day passed in an uneasy silence, with Karen barely acknowledging Tyler's existence. She was fuming, and the thought of having to attend a parenting class only added to her humiliation. That evening, as Karen reluctantly signed up for the class, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of resentment towards the school and the principal. How dare they try to tell her how to parent her own child? She was the one who knew what was best for Tyler, not some stuffy administrator. As she filled out the registration form, a plan began to form in her mind. If they thought she was going to just roll over and accept this, they had another thing coming. Karen was determined to find a way to get out of this parenting class, no matter what it took. As Karen sat in the first parenting class, her eyes scanned the room, sizing up her fellow attendees. They were a motley crew of parents, all of whom had been summoned to this dreaded course for various disciplinary infractions. Karen couldn't help but feel a sense of superiority as she observed the others. Unlike them, she was only here because of her son's tardiness, not because of any real parenting issues. She was certain that she would be able to charm her way out of this, just as she had done countless times before. When the instructor, a stern-looking woman named Ms. Jacobs, began the session, Karen put on her best concerned parent act. She asked questions, nodded emphatically, and even shared a few relatable anecdotes about the challenges of modern parenting. But beneath her saccharine facade, Karen's mind was already working overtime, plotting her escape. During the break, she approached Ms. Jacobs and struck up a conversation, carefully positioning herself as a victim of circumstance. "You know, I really appreciate you taking the time to run this class," Karen said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "But I have to be honest, I'm not sure I belong here. My situation is a bit different from the others." Ms. Jacobs eyed her skeptically. "Oh, do tell." Karen launched into a carefully crafted tale of woe, describing how her son's tardiness was due to a difficult home situation and how the principal had unfairly singled her out. She even shed a few crocodile tears for added effect. "I just feel like this class isn't really the right fit for me," Karen concluded, her eyes wide and imploring. "Is there any way I could be excused from the remaining sessions?" Ms. Jacobs considered her words, her brow furrowed in thought. Well, Mrs. Bartlett, I understand your concerns, but the principal was quite clear that attending this course is a mandatory requirement. I'm afraid I don't have the authority to excuse you. Karen's face fell, and she quickly switched tactics. Oh, I see. Well, perhaps we could have a private discussion about my situation. I'm sure if you understood the nuances, you might be able to make an exception. The instructor hesitated, sensing that there was more to Karen's story than met the eye. I'll tell you what, Mrs. Bartlett. Let me speak with the principal and see if we can find a suitable alternative for you. In the meantime, I'd like you to continue attending the class as scheduled. Karen's lips curled into a triumphant smile. Of course, Miss Jacobs. I understand completely. Thank you so much for your understanding. As she returned to her seat, Karen couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. She had the instructor right where she wanted her, and she was confident that she would be able to wriggle her way out of this parenting class before long. Over the next few days, Karen continued her campaign to get out of the parenting class. She bombarded Ms. Jacobs with phone calls, emails, and even in-person visits, each time spinning a more elaborate tale of woe. My son is dealing with some severe anxiety issues, she would lament, her voice dripping with false concern. This class is just adding to his stress, and I'm worried it could have a negative impact on his mental health. Ms. Jacobs listened patiently, her skepticism growing with each passing interaction. She had seen her fair share of manipulative parents over the years, and Karen's tactics were starting to feel all too familiar. Finally, the instructor had had enough. Mrs. Bartlett, I appreciate your concerns, but I've spoken with the principal, and he's made it clear that your attendance in this class is non-negotiable. If you continue to miss the sessions, Tyler will face suspension. Karen's face fell, and for a moment, she was at a loss for words. But you don't understand, she stammered, her carefully crafted facade crumbling. This is just so inconvenient for me. I have a very busy schedule, and I can't possibly find the time to attend these classes. Ms. Jacobs held up a hand, silencing her. I'm sorry, Mrs. Bartlett, but the decision has been made. You either attend the classes as scheduled, or Tyler will face the consequences. It's as simple as that. As Karen left the class that evening, she was seething with rage. How dare they defy her like this? She was used to getting her way, and the fact that the school was refusing to bend to her will was infuriating. On the drive home, Karen's mind raced, searching for a way to regain control of the situation. She couldn't allow the school to win, not when she had so much at stake. Suddenly, an idea struck her. If the school was going to play hardball, then so would she. Karen knew exactly how to get the upper hand, and she wasn't afraid to use it. As she pulled into the driveway, a sly grin spread across her face. This wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. The next morning, Karen arrived at the principal's office, her eyes red from what appeared to be tears. Principal Wilkins looked up, his brow furrowed with concern. Mrs. Bartlett, what's wrong? Is everything all right? Karen sniffled and dabbed at her eyes with a delicate handkerchief. Oh, Principal Wilkins, I'm just so distraught, she said, her voice quivering. I've been trying my best to attend those parenting classes, but they're just making things so much worse for my poor Tyler. The principal leaned forward, his expression softening. Worse? I don't understand. I thought the classes were meant to help you and Tyler. Karen nodded, her lips trembling. That's what I thought too, but the instructor, she's just so mean and unsympathetic. Every time I try to explain my situation, she just shuts me down. Principal Wilkins frowned, his suspicions beginning to rise. What exactly is your situation, Mrs. Bartlett? Karen took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for the painful revelation. Well, you see, Tyler has been going through a very difficult time. He's been struggling with anxiety and depression, and the stress of these parenting classes is only making it worse. She paused, dabbing at her eyes again. I'm still worried about him, Principal Wilkins. I feel like I'm failing as a mother, and now the school is just piling on more pressure. I don't know what to do." The principal listened intently, his expression shifting from concern to sympathy. "Mrs. Bartlett, I had no idea Tyler was dealing with such serious issues. Why didn't you bring this to my attention sooner?" Karen sniffed, her gaze downcast. "I was so ashamed, Principal Wilkins. I thought I could handle it on my own, but it's just become too much. I'm terrified that Tyler's mental health is going to suffer because of all this." Principal Wilkins nodded, his expression grave. "I see. Well, in that case, I think we need to reevaluate the parenting class requirement. Your son's well-being should be the top priority." Karen looked up, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Do you really mean that, Principal Wilkins? I would be so grateful if we could find another way to address this." The principal smiled sympathetically. "Of course, Mrs. Bartlett. Let's see what we can do to support you and Tyler during this difficult time. The last thing I want is for this to have a negative impact on his mental health." As Karen left the office, a triumphant grin spread across her face. She had played the victim card perfectly, and the principal had fallen for it hook, line, and sinker. Now she was one step closer to getting out of those dreaded parenting classes, and she couldn't wait to see what other tricks she had up her sleeve. In the days following Karen's emotional plea to the principal, the school seemed to have eased up on its parenting class requirement. Tyler was no longer being held accountable for his tardiness, and Karen appeared to have avoided any further disciplinary action. However, this newfound leniency did not sit well with Ms. Jacobs, the parenting class instructor. She had been deeply suspicious of Karen's claims from the beginning, and now her instincts were telling her that something was not right. Determined to get to the bottom of the situation, Ms. Jacobs decided to pay a visit to the Bartlett household. She arrived unannounced, her brow furrowed with determination. When Karen opened the door, her eyes widened in surprise. "Miss Jacobs, what unexpected surprise. To what do I owe this visit?" The instructor's gaze was stern and unyielding. "Mrs. Bartlett, I'm afraid I need to speak with you and your son about the situation at the school. May I come in?" Karen hesitated, her mind racing. "Well, I'm not sure that's really necessary. Tyler and I were just about to head out, actually." But Ms. Jacobs was having none of it. "I insist, Mrs. Bartlett. This is a matter of great importance, and I won't leave until I've had a chance to speak with you both." Reluctantly, Karen stepped aside, allowing the instructor to enter the house. As they gathered in the living room, Tyler looked on, his expression a mixture of confusion and apprehension. "All right, Mrs. Bartlett," Ms. Jacobs began, her tone sharp. "I've been doing some digging, and I've come to the conclusion that your claims about Tyler's mental health issues were nothing more than a fabrication." Karen's face paled, and she opened her mouth to protest, but the instructor raised a hand to silence her. "I spoke with Tyler's doctor, and they had no record of any anxiety or depression diagnosis. In fact, they told me that Tyler is a perfectly healthy and well-adjusted young man." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Tyler glanced nervously at his mother, sensing that the truth was about to be revealed. "So, Mrs. Bartlett, I'll ask you again. What is really going on here?" Ms. Jacobs demanded, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Karen sat in stunned silence, her carefully constructed lies unraveling before her eyes. She had never anticipated that the school would go to such lengths to verify her claims, and now she was cornered, with no way out. As the truth began to emerge, Tyler's expression shifted from confusion to a dawning realization. He had always known that his mother had a penchant for manipulation, but this was a whole new level of deception. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of the Bartlett family. The air in the Bartlett living room was thick with tension as Ms. Jacobs stared down Karen, her suspicions confirmed. Tyler, caught in the middle, shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between the two women. "Well, Mrs. Bartlett," Ms. Jacobs prompted, her tone laced with barely contained frustration. I'm waiting for an explanation. Karen swallowed hard, her usual self-assurance crumbling under the weight of the instructor's unwavering gaze. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, her voice betraying her panic. But Ms. Jacobs was having none of it. Don't play dumb with me, Mrs. Bartlett. I have proof that you lied about Tyler's mental health issues in order to get out of the parenting classes. And I'm willing to bet that this isn't the first time you've used deceit to manipulate the school and get your way. Karen's face flushed with a mix of anger and shame. This is outrageous. How dare you accuse me of lying? I was only trying to do what's best for my son. Best for your son? Ms. Jacobs scoffed. Lying and manipulating the system is not what's best for Tyler. In fact, I'd argue that your actions have been nothing but detrimental to his well-being. Tyler, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. Mom, is it true? Did you really lie about me having anxiety and depression? Karen's gaze snapped to her son, her expression a mixture of defiance and desperation. Tyler, you have to understand. I was only trying to protect you. Those parenting classes were a waste of time, and I knew they wouldn't help us. Tyler shook his head, his eyes filled with a combination of disappointment and betrayal. That's not your decision to make, Mom. You lied to the school, to the principal, and to me. How can I trust you anymore? Karen opened her mouth to respond, but the words died on her lips. For once, she was at a loss for a comeback, her usual arsenal of manipulation and deflection rendered useless. Ms. Jacobs took advantage of the pregnant silence. Mrs. Bartlett, I'm afraid I have no choice but to report your actions to the principal. This kind of behavior cannot be tolerated, and there will be consequences. Karen's eyes widened in alarm. No, please. You can't do that. Think of Tyler. Think of how this will affect him. The instructor's expression remained resolute. The only person you should be thinking about is Tyler, Mrs. Bartlett. And the fact that you're more concerned about the consequences to yourself than the impact on your son speaks volumes. As Ms. Jacobs turned to leave, Karen's world began to crumble around her. She had always been able to manipulate the system, to get her way no matter the cost. But this time, her web of lies had been exposed, and the price she would have to pay was steep. In the end, it was karma that had caught up with Karen, and the impact of her actions would reverberate through her life, forever changing the dynamic between her and her son.